friend Adler decided to do something different for his birthday this past winter. Instead of a house party, he rented our town's outdoor ice rink for a couple of hours at night. It was late December, the kind of cold where your breath hangs around your face, and there was a storm warning for later. But the rink office said we were fine to use it as long as we were out by 11. There were 8 of us who showed up that night. We got there around 9, cars already dusted with fresh snow, and let ourselves into the hut with the key his dad had picked up earlier. Inside, it was colder than any of us expected. The main wall heater barely did anything except hum, and the little space heater plugged in by the door threw out a narrow strip of warmth you had to stand directly in front of. We tossed our bags and the cake box onto the long bench along the wall, taped up a cheap happy birthday banner, complained about our fingers while tying our skates, and then went out onto the ice because nobody wanted to be the one to say, "This is too cold, let's go home," after Adler had paid to rent the place. Once we were on the ice, it actually felt kind of perfect for a winter birthday. The first time I went in, there were a couple of us standing over the small heater with our gloves off, talking about nothing. Our stuff was where we left it, the cake untouched. The second time, it was me and my friend Briggs. Same thing. Quick warm-up, some dumb conversation about school, then back out to skate. It felt normal enough that I didn't think twice about going in alone the third time. The third time is when it stopped feeling like a birthday. I was losing feeling in my toes and the tip of my nose. So I told Adler I'd be back in a minute and headed off the ice toward the hut. Outside, the snow had picked up a bit, and the sound of everyone else's voices slid into the background. Inside, the hut was quiet except for the low hum of the heater. The door didn't latch all the way at first. It bounced back an inch, so I pulled it shut until it caught and walked over to the heater to hold my hands over it. Then, the heater clicked off by itself. The orange glow died. The noise stopped, but the small red light on the switch stayed on, like it was still plugged in properly. I flipped it off and on, waited, and it kicked back to life. It was a small thing, but suddenly the room felt a little too quiet. I turned around to look for my water bottle, and noticed the cake box was closer to the corner than before. We'd left it more toward the middle of the bench, and I hadn't seen anyone move it. You don't normally track the position of a box, but in that moment it stuck out. I was still telling myself I just hadn't noticed it earlier when I heard the doorknob behind me move. It wasn't a knock. It was the metal sound of someone turning it slowly, like they were trying not to make noise. I stared at the door and listened. It happened again. Just a small, careful rattle. I called out, thinking it was one of my friends, but nobody answered. Outside, I could hear blades on the ice and echoing voices, but they sounded far, like everyone was on the opposite side of the rink. I walked toward the door, and before I reached it, the knob let go on its own. No footsteps on the little platform outside. No shadow at the gap under the door. I opened it and looked out. Everyone I knew was out on the ice, grouped near the far end. The lot was in view, just our cars under the light. No one close enough to have grabbed the knob and slipped away without me seeing them in the snow. I went back in, more on edge now, and stood near the heater, listening harder than before. A short time later, there was a dull thump against the wall behind the bench, like a shoulder or back hitting it from the outside, on the side that faces the path and trees. That was enough to make me decide I didn't want to be in there alone anymore. I'd started to turn for the door when it opened, and a man stepped inside. He was older than us, late 20s or early 30s maybe. Dark jacket zipped to his neck, hat low, no rink logo, no smile. He just came in like he belonged there, and let the door fall almost shut behind him. He looked at me, then at the heater, then at the bench where our bags and the cake were, like he was taking inventory. I told him we had the rink rented for a birthday. It came out short and tight. He didn't say anything back. He took another step into the room. The sound from the ice dropped as the door eased closer to the frame. He moved toward the bench in a slow, steady way that didn't look nervous or rushed at all. I shifted to the side so I wasn't pinned in the corner, which put me closer to the door but still inside his reach. He set one hand on the edge of the bench near our stuff, fingers spreading on the cardboard like it was his now. We just stared at each other for a second. He stayed between me and the exit and didn't ask a single normal question. It felt less like he'd walked into the wrong place and more like he'd finally found the right one. I tried to step around him. He moved just enough to stay in my way. We were close enough that if he reached once, he'd grab me. I didn't wait for that. I dropped my shoulder and slammed into him. It was messy and more instinct than plan. His back hit the wall, the bench scraped loud, and the heater rocked on its legs. He grabbed for me on reflex, fingers catching my sleeve and part of my shirt, and his hand slid up and clipped the side of my head. It wasn't a full punch, more like a hard shove that caught my ear, but it stung deep in the cold and made my eyes water. I pushed off the wall with both hands, using it like a spring, and that gave me just enough room to slip past. My shoulder slid off his chest, my hip bumped the heater, and I went straight for the door. I yanked it open and stumbled onto the small platform outside, almost missing a step on the snow-covered boards. Behind me, I heard his boots on the hut floor and the door hit the frame, but I didn't look back. I shouted Adler's name as loud as I could. Everyone on the ice stopped. Blades scraped as they turned toward the hut. Someone yelled out asking what happened, but I was already jumping down off the platform and onto the snow, just trying to get back where people could see me. When I turned around, the hut door stood open a crack, light spilling through in a thin line. No one came out. Adler skated off the ice toward the gate. I kept staring at the doorway, waiting for that jacket to appear in it. Nothing. We met by the boards, and I tried to explain between breaths. While I talked, the door moved wider, and from where we were standing, you could see inside. Bench, banner, heater, our bags. No man. Adler and Briggs stepped off the ice with their skates still on and went straight up to the hut. I followed them back up to the platform. They went in, checked behind the door, both corners, even shoved the bench away from the wall a little. The room was completely empty. There's only that one door. No side room, no back exit. My ear still hurt where he'd hit it, but there was nowhere obvious he could have gone in those few seconds, where I was outside yelling, and everyone was looking at me instead of the building. We checked the lot. Our 2 cars sat under the one tall light. No other vehicles. The only tracks in the fresh snow between the hut and the lot were the ones we'd made earlier, walking back and forth. Nobody wanted to keep skating after that. The whole mood flipped from, it's fun, to, let's leave in under a minute. We went back into the hut together to grab our stuff. That's when Adler realized the cake box was gone. 2 bags of chips and a plastic container with snacks from one end of the bench were gone too. Everything else was still there. Phones, wallets, keys, jackets, whatever he was doing in there. He left with food and nothing else. We told ourselves. He must have slipped out around the side of the hut while I was running to the ice, and everyone's eyes were on me, not on the door, and that we just missed him in the dark. It was the only way to make the timing feel normal, even though the lack of any new footprints between the hut and the lot didn't match that story very well. We locked up, shut off the lights, and walked to the cars in a tight group. Every sound in the lot, the crunch under our boots, doors opening, engines starting, felt too loud after how quiet that little room had been. I kept glancing at the path toward the road, expecting to see that dark jacket standing there, but the park stayed empty. My 20th birthday was the first one I spent as a legal adult, but it's also the one that made me feel the most like a clueless kid. My name's Aaron, and I live in a regular neighborhood outside Milwaukee. That year, my parents both had to work on the actual day, so the plan was simple. We'd go out for dinner when they got home. Before they left that morning, they just told me not to make any big plans around noon because they had something in mind for me. It sounded like they meant some kind of delivery or boring errand, so I didn't think much of it. I had the house to myself, and the whole morning to kill. A little before noon, I heard a van pull up outside. When I looked out the front window, there was a white work van parked in front of our house, with a generic-looking auto detailing sign stuck on the side and a number printed under it. A guy got out, mid-30s maybe, wearing work pants, hoodie, and baseball cap. He walked up with a plastic caddy of spray bottles and a toolbox. When I opened the door, he greeted me by my first name and said he was there to do a full interior and exterior clean on my car, set up as a birthday thing by my dad. He mentioned my dad by name too, like it was already arranged, and he said he was booked to do it at our address around noon. The way he said it, confident, like he did this all day, made it feel routine enough that my brain didn't slam on the brakes the way it probably should have. I asked what he needed from me, and he said he'd get better results if he pulled the car into the garage, out of the wind and salt dust in the air, and worked in there instead of on the street. We have an attached garage, and on that day it was dry, cold, and windy, so that explanation didn't sound strange. I grabbed my car keys and the garage opener from the little bowl by the door and handed them to him. I watched him walk down the driveway, get into my Civic, open the garage, pull it in, and then close the door with the button on the wall. After that, from the front of the house, all I could see was the back of his van and a shut garage door. At that point, I still thought my parents had just gone overboard on a surprise, and I was about to get my messy car handed back to me spotless, like some commercial. For the first half hour or so, it seemed fine from the outside. I sat in the living room, half watching YouTube and half listening for anything that sounded wrong. I expected to hear water and a hose at some point, but I didn't, and that stuck out in a small way. I got up to grab a drink in the kitchen and noticed faint white marks on the tile near the door to the garage, like footprints from salt on shoes, going in a few steps and then back out. The door itself was closed the way we normally keep it. I knew I hadn't gone out there. Nobody had knocked or called into the house either. I stood there for a moment, looking at the handle and trying to convince myself he'd just stepped inside for a second to grab something and I hadn't noticed. As time went on, the pattern of sounds in the garage changed. There were longer stretches of silence broken up by heavier scraping noises, then short, solid thuds from the area near the wall, where the door to the house is. I left the kitchen and stood in the hallway, where I could see both the front door and the garage door, feeling this slow, creeping sense that something about this whole gift didn't line up. He'd never asked me to sign anything. He hadn't shown me a work order or even given me a card. He'd just said my name, dropped my dad's, and taken my keys. It was close to 2 when my phone buzzed with a text from my mom, asking if I'd seen what they'd sent. She told me to check my account. When I opened my banking app, there was a transfer from my parents with a note about using it for the car and enjoy your birthday. No mention of a company, no booked service, just money. I stared at that screen for a second, then typed back asking what exactly was supposed to show up at noon, because there was already someone here working in the garage. I didn't even get to see her reply before she called me outright. I stepped into the kitchen to answer and told her everything as calmly as I could. She went straight to say they hadn't hired anyone, that the only thing they'd done was send me cash. Her voice changed in a way that made my stomach drop. She told me to leave the house and get outside where other people could see me. While she was saying that, I heard the door handle from the garage side turn. It made that familiar squeak, but this time the latch followed. The door started to open while I still had the phone pressed to my ear. I hung up, moved straight past the doorway and went to the front door. I grabbed my wallet by habit, yanked the deadbolt, and stepped out onto the porch. As I pulled the door closed behind me, I could hear the inside garage door swing fully open and his footsteps crossing onto the tile. I went down the steps and out to the sidewalk, putting distance between us so there was space and sight lines instead of walls. From across the street, I turned to look at the house. The van sat in the driveway, the garage door still shut. He appeared a moment later in the front doorway, just standing there, He still had my keys in his hand. He didn't run or yell. He just stared, and then his attention dropped to the phone in my hand and the way I was watching him from the other side of the road. There was this long, uncomfortable pause where nobody said anything. After that stare down, he turned without a word, went back inside, and a few seconds later I heard the garage door start to open. I watched from where I was as the door lifted, and my car came into view, parked at a slight angle. He rolled the door up all the way, got into his van, and backed it out just far enough to clear the driveway. He pulled onto the street, took the nearest corner, and disappeared. It all happened smooth and quick, like he'd practiced leaving places fast once someone started paying attention to him. When I finally worked up the nerve to go back, the house was dead quiet. The garage smelled like cold concrete and dust, not soap or cleaner. My car's exterior looked exactly as dirty as before. Same streaks, same spots on the wheels. Inside, the mats were still gritty, crumbs everywhere, nothing wiped down. He hadn't touched it. What he had touched was the rest of the garage. A couple of my dad's power tools were gone from the wall, a bike was missing from the hooks, and a plastic bin with random tools and extension cords had been dragged closer to the door, like he'd started to load it and then stopped. There were gouges in the wood frame around the door to the house, like he'd been prying at it from the garage side at some point before he decided to just turn the handle and step in. Later, when my parents came home and I told them everything in order, the part that made my dad go silent wasn't the stolen tools or the bike. It was the fact that I had handed a stranger the keys to the house and my car because he knew our names and showed up at roughly the right time. He kept saying that if the guy had wanted to, he could have walked in a lot sooner than he did, that the only thing that stopped it from being worse was that I walked out before he fully crossed that threshold. On paper, the whole thing looks like a property crime on my birthday. The way it felt, though, was standing in my own kitchen hearing that door handle turn, knowing someone I didn't know was on the other side of the wall with my keys in his pocket, and 2 hours alone in our garage behind him. I was 9 when this happened, and most of that party is fuzzy in my head, but a few parts are still way too clear. My classmate had his birthday at one of those trampoline parks. It was a Saturday, no school the next day, kids everywhere, parents talking up on a balcony, the usual chaos. The park had their own photographer walking around with a camera as part of the party deal, so having some adult taking pictures didn't seem strange at all. In my mind back then, if a grown-up had a camera and was inside the building, they were automatically with us. Somewhere in the middle of all the jumping and running back to the party room for more chips, there was another man with a camera. Not the one in the staff shirt, just a guy with a camera around his neck. I don't really remember his face now. Just that he was there on the edge of the trampolines, talking to kids and lifting the camera up sometimes. My brain didn't flag it, I just filed him with the other camera guy. At that age, I didn't really separate who belonged where. At one point, I ended up near him and he started talking to me. I don't remember the exact sentences, but the point was he wanted to take some extra pictures for the birthday. Just a few kids, something special. He said we'd go over to a better spot for it. That was enough for me. I liked the idea that I'd be in whatever special photos he meant, so I followed. In my memory, we didn't go that far, just away from where everyone else was bunched up. It was still inside, still the same building, still the same noise, just not right in the middle of the group anymore. The next part is where it sharpens. He had me near a side area and wanted me closer to a door. I didn't think about where it went. I just did what he said because he sounded like he knew what he was doing. He had one hand on the door and the camera hanging there, and I remember moving the way he told me to, like I was about to help make some cool picture happen. I wasn't scared at that moment. I was just trying to listen. Then my mom shouted my name from up above. That's the sound I remember the most, her voice cutting through everything else, way louder and more panicked than any normal time-to-eat cake call. I looked up and saw her leaning over the railing, staring straight at me. I stopped where I was, and so did he. I stepped back toward the trampolines without really processing why, just reacting to her voice. After that, it turns into quick flashes. My mom coming down fast, other adults finally noticing, staff getting involved, and that man not hanging around to explain anything. By the time people were actually looking for him, he was gone. Later, when I was older and asked about it, my mom told me what she saw from her angle. Me by a side door with a man she didn't recognize, his hand on it. Me doing what he told me. That alone was enough for her to yell. The park wrote it down. She gave a description. They checked what they could, and that was the end of it as far as we know. But the older I get, the more it scares me how normal it all felt in the moment. I wasn't dragged or grabbed. I just walked where some stranger told me to because he said it was for the party. And the only thing that stopped it going further was my mom looking down at exactly the right time